to look after your well-being, I'm just going to ask you to just quickly stand up for a minute and just move your body in some form, just to take the pressure off your lower spine from sitting. Maybe just stretch up, move, or just any way that's comfortable to you, and any injuries you have before sitting back down and starting a new session. And just in terms of your own well-being, if you're doing any coaching, it's really important to put a pause, what we call the third space, where you go from one thing to the next thing, to have a moment in the middle that you just let everything go. And that's tip number one, is practice always transitioning the ability to let things go. So you've been coaching someone, you're about to go home, or you're about to, greet your children or your partner. What can you do physically or otherwise to let go? So my background is I'm a psychologist, and can you see the screen up there? Yep, great. I also do a lot of coaching, and I'm very clear between when I'm in a counselling or therapeutic session and when I'm in a coaching session. However, and I guess what we're talking about today is that often when you're in a coaching session, someone hasn't come to have their mental health dealt with in that coaching session. They've come for other goals and reasons, and Carmel was, a great system to help draw that out and clarify that. However, I'd like you to read this quote: "A real conversation always contains an invitation. You're inviting another person to reveal herself or himself to you, to tell you who they are and what they want." Now, as soon as you do that, you're actually inviting in and saying to people, let's get real, let's get vulnerable, let's take our mask off. And you're also inviting them through your training to create a safe space. And so as soon as you put those ingredients together, there is naturally a line that people will cross where they will let their guard down and they will reveal other parts of themselves just by the nature of you sitting and listening. So that's why understanding what to do where mental health issues come up is knowing what to do. And even as a trained psychologist, there are moments where I'm sitting in, whether it's a therapeutic session or a coaching session, where I go, whoa, this is getting outside the realms of what I was expecting this session was about. It could be that someone reveals something very private and quite with a lot of gravity, like I was abused as a child and I've never told anyone that. It could be, something like, oh, my husband's beating me up and, I feel like we've got a really good relationship. I could tell you that. Or that sense of I'm really depressed. It has actually occurred to me that I wanted to kill myself. These things can creep into any session where you have invited someone into a real conversation. Did anyone want to respond to that just before I move on? Feel free to jump in, by the way, as we talk. But this next thing I'm going to show you is a participation request. On the slide, up the top, you can see there's images. And I'm going to ask you that question that's on the screen. Why is it so much easier to respond to instances where if you were walking down the street and you saw a lady fall off a bike or get injured, or anybody, or you're at the soccer field and someone really injured themselves, or you're an athlete, as we probably saw if we watched the Olympics, where an athlete, broke like their hamstring, I don't know the technical term, but, they injured themselves. What would you do? And why do you think it's so much easier to get your instincts kicking in to help in that scenario, in contrast to have you ever been on the street where you saw someone leaning over and crying, or, really emotional in some form, or in a workplace where someone was withdrawn and seemed to be really inside themselves or different. I'd like to hear from you. Why do you think it's so different to be able to help with physical clear injuries rather than these other more psychological injuries?
Is it social schema? Like we're taught by our parents sometimes, or the people around us, that there's a really obvious way to help a physical injury that happens right in front of us, but we're perhaps not shown from a young childhood age how to approach more complicated emotional injuries of the same calibre.
Definitely. Like, how many people here have done first aid training somewhere in your life? You know, your bronze medallion, even going back, like you say, Lauren, back to early days, we were trained to, if you come across someone, you know, drowning or with a heart attack, or you get that drummed into you in society really easily. We probably have been conditioned to repel people who we think, oh, they're a bit mad, a bit unpredictable, let's withdraw away from them. Any other comments on this?
Hi, Melissa. I think as well, in the first instance, we're not as vulnerable ourselves when we can help these people. You go, you do the steps, you lift them up off the road, whatever the scenario is. Whereas in the second instance, by trying to hold space for people going through this, you're also in a way holding up a mirror to yourself, and you're more vulnerable yourself, and you've also got to be in a space you can help that person. So it requires more in many ways, I think, to do that. So, and some people just aren't at that, you know, I guess there's an inherent kind of feeling that, oh, am I the person to help this? Am I actually capable of holding space for this person given what they're going through? Yeah, I think it's easier in a sense to help the physical, even though it's obviously, but it's you're not as vulnerable or as exposed yourself as in the second instance.
It's a beautiful reflection, Claire, and shows great insight and self-awareness. Thank you for sharing. Another final one before we move on?
Yeah, I would like to share, because like when you asked why is it easier, I actually, when I see people crying in the street, I usually I feel more connected to come and give them support. And I was just like, while Claire was saying, I was just thinking that I think it also might depend, because if I see someone getting injured, I don't know how to help them to fix it, but I can call people to help. But when it's emotional, I can give a hug, I can give support. I'm not going to fix it as well, but I feel very comfortable on offering support and a hug and a space. So it was funny when you asked the question, because I actually feel more comfortable when it's emotional than when it's physical.
And that's beautiful, Taddy. And what you've revealed, which is wonderful for our discussion, is that we all have our different natural preferences and comfort around emotion. And, you know, that's a whole other thing in itself, is tuning in to different styles in people. Like some people are wired to be a lot more emotional, like reading emotion and comfortable around emotion, as we know. Some people are more cognitive and are comfortable in that way. And some people, some people, when they see blood and stuff, are like, whoa, that's not my kind of thing. So yeah, you've raised some really rich points, that, and maybe within that, Taddy, there are people where they're crying and they're kind of folding in and they're depressed, or they're, you know, you might be drawn to them, but when they're showing other signs of emotions, there may be a less, oh, hang on, I'm not so sure, you know, so that can change as well. But thank you, and feel free to add stuff in the chat as well. And there are quite a few comments here. Yeah, I like your strengths must be empathy and compassion. Potentially the second instance may take a longer and more of your time, and that's absolutely true. You can get someone off the bike and onto the side quickly. Yeah, that more personal, emotional and private versus physical public. It's a really good point there. You're absolutely right, because when there's something internal, it's obviously something about, could be a person's identity that's at stake. It could be something really intimate to them. So I really love your comments, and it shows you're really tuning in and thinking about this. So I'll just move on. Noticing something might not be right is a really key thing to you being an effective coach, and knowing, oh, hang on, I probably need to pay attention to this, because, you know, in a normal coaching session, there's lots that comes out about this and my goal or my challenge. And as was mentioned earlier, that Carmel was bringing out, something might have happened, something quite intense. I was in a coaching session yesterday with a very senior executive lady, you know, and she just within the first 5 minutes just burst out crying. Now that was just a normal release, because she had some bullying happen in the office with some other executive, and it was just like a release, you know. I wasn't left thinking there was anything I had to dial up around her mental health, or it was just human and within the realms of the struggle she'd had at work. However, the clues that I might not be okay and that I might need to follow someone up, I like it. In psychology, we're often trained around this flower. See this flower? You know, when you do cognitive behavior therapy or even other therapies, emotionally focused therapy, all these different therapies, not that your role is around therapy, but your entry point into just understanding mental health for, you know, is to understand the person's thinking. Like I was in a coaching session one day, and someone, their thinking really worried me, you know, and I thought, oh, we're slipping into, I need to act on this. This is in the realm of this person needs mental health support. You know, and some people will start to generalize that everything's really hopeless. It's never going to change. I'm always going to feel this bad. That's a real sign that someone is maybe in a space that you may need to get more support. Not when it's like just their personality, but where they're really in a hole and they lose any sense of hope through their thinking that's revealed. And they might start talking about harming themselves, like, oh, what's the point of living? You know, I might just go home and just wipe myself out. It can present, you know, worrying signs, and or their thoughts are really extreme or incoherent. Like I had a man one day who I think, you know, who was actually having a psychotic episode and started saying some very odd things, that there were, he wanted to drink the blood of people, you know. So you start to go, whoa, this is really not coherent, and we need to scale up this response. Now, these aren't everyday occurrences, but we are human, and sometimes, you know, if someone has some underlying mental health problem that changes their chemistry or way of seeing, their thoughts will be noticed. So another one is your feelings. Like someone turns up to your coaching and they're in this, they have a general sense about their feeling realm, and then one day they're just folded over and looking down and really deflated. Now, as I said, like my woman yesterday, she was crying, but it was like a release to cry. She felt safe to cry. It wasn't like she was totally in this deep hole that I couldn't, you know, help her out of. It was just, you know, sometimes if you get a feeling that their emotion is so heavy and so visibly unable to be regulated. And we use that word regulated, which means a person can't go, look, I know I'm feeling down, but I know I'll be okay. Unregulated is where they become enmeshed in the emotion, and there's just no way of them having a perspective on the emotion. So that's when one does need to be a little bit, like emotion versus despair. It's very different. Despair is really like, Shelley, you've mentioned. Now, someone's asked, how do you have that conversation around mental health support? I'll get to that. But these questions, like just asking someone, you don't really seem yourself. Reflecting back content is so important. It's part of mental health training, is that you need to be able to honestly say, this is what I'm seeing. And if someone says, no, I'm fine, it's sometimes good to probe a little bit more and say, are you really? Like, I am concerned about you. It's actually okay to say, I'm concerned about you. And, I just want to check in with you because, I'm feeling like you might need to go and get extra support. Because you can also, a nice thing is to say, on a scale of 1 to 10, how extreme is this for you? Are you normally feeling this depressed or this way? And if and a 10 is where it's extremely, I'm not normally like this and it's really out of control. Once someone starts to get from 6 to 10 around how difficult this is for them, I would normally be sort of starting to talk about referring them and getting them connected to get some support. So the thing is, I've put the suicide checklist here. It is an important part of the most foundational piece of any mental health, is to be able to just, you might know someone, you might have had about 3 or 4 sessions and they've talked about, doing stuff on weekends or connecting with people or their interaction in their work. When you start to get a sense that maybe a person's just stayed at home with the blinds shut all weekend, that's an alarm bell. Or where they just dropped deeply into a mood that was, not associated with natural. It's natural to have moods around, someone passed away or different things. You lost a job, you were really wanting. It's where it's a persistent drop, and it's the person can't climb back out. Mental health first aid courses are really good to do. And I agree that it's a great skill to have when you're in any kind of helping or human interaction area, because it gives you the confidence, like you would to do CPR or bandage up someone's injury. It sort of gives you a confidence it spends more than this half an hour and says, okay, let's practice having a conversation with someone around suicide. Let's practice having a conversation around referring them to a mental health assessment. But it's important that you're looking at both non-verbal indicators and indirect verbal expressions. Where someone might not say, oh, I want to kill myself, but they might start saying, I just feel like I'm going to give away everything, or there's no need for anything that's about I don't see a future with me in it, is a real key. And when people start believing things like, I've had a lot of times where people have said, my family would be better without me. That's a real sign when people start saying it, and they genuinely mean it, that my kids would be better if I wasn't here, which is heartbreaking, but it's those, and in that response, you don't, and we'll talk about that in a minute, it's not about trying to, say, I'll cheer up, that's ridiculous. Of course your children love you. It's really, really important to actually hold that space and empathise with them feeling that way, not trying to quickly shift them out of it. So that's really quite important.
Just jumping in quickly, we'll just have to wrap up in a moment. So sorry, I know it's an important topic.
Now, this is the summary points I wanted to make sure we finish on, I guess, and that is the mental health first aid action plan, that you really want to be able to have these 5 steps in mind. On the right-hand side, you want to be able to assess is there a risk of suicide as per the stuff I was talking about. Your role is to listen non-judgmentally, and that means to just say, wow, that sounds really hard. Then, then you need to be able to give empathy and normalize it. Gee, if I, based on what you'd been through, I would imagine that would be incredibly hard. Not about, oh, well, I went through that too. It's more just reflecting back and normalizing, gee, that's an appropriate response. And then you need to encourage the appropriate professional help. So an example would be look, the way you're speaking sounds to me like you could really do with some support, and that people who really know how to help you. And that's when you would then encourage not just professional help, but I wouldn't usually, if I was dealing with someone, I wouldn't say goodbye to them until I'd worked out, are you going to go home to someone that cares for you? And do you have friends, families? That's one of the other big things you can do, is just check out their social supports, because if someone's going home to nobody, then there may be an appropriateness that you say, I'd really like to know that you're okay and you've got someone that's going to check in with you. So just finally, I guess one of the things that Anna wanted to talk about is having compassion in your coaching is really important, but you want to be careful that that compassion doesn't spill into burnout. And this is a little model, and the source is there and you can look it up. But basically, it's just about being able to set boundaries. So you need to be able to tune into someone, but you also need to be able to engage and end a session where you scan your own emotions and name what you're feeling. If you've been with someone really depressed, you can name what you're feeling, and you can accept and normalize that will impact on you, and practice some self-care. But first you need to be able to really process your own feeling of handling some of these uncomfortable emotions. And the best way to stay buoyant doing this kind of work, where maybe potentially it can be draining, is to actively go out and create oxytocin in your life. Share positive stories, use humor. I sometimes, if I've done a lot of heavy days in therapy, I will watch comedies. And I will go and connect in nature. I will hang out with children, and I will practice gratitude. And I've found those 3 things are the main way to stay buoyant. So you've got in the toolkit these referrals, and you yourself can also always ring Lifeline or any mental health line to say, I've got someone I'm concerned about, what should I do? So thank you, everyone.
That was absolutely brilliant. Thank you so much, Melisah. It's honestly, we really, really needed that. And I think it's such a difficult time for people at the moment. I'm sorry we've had to squeeze you and whiz through that really quickly.
All good.
But we will put lots of these resources in the toolkits, in the Slack channel as well. And gratitude from everybody here. You've donated your time today, and we're so grateful for that. Such an important piece. So lots and lots of love from all of us to you.
Thank you. Have a great session.